I'm Allison LaForgia, and today I have two fantastic guests, Michelle Golden and Scott Reuter. And today we're talking about what everybody's talking about in the industry, UAD 3.6, but through a different lens. We're not just talking compliance, but operational excellence for mortgage lending and how lenders turn a required change into a competitive advantage. So, first, let's meet who we're actually speaking with today. Michelle, let's start with you.
Hi there, Michelle Golden, Chief Appraiser, Accurate Group. I've been here for 3 years, but 30 years in the valuation business.
And we also have Scott with us.
Hi, Allison. Thank you. And it's always nice being with Michelle. Scott Reuter. I'm the Chief Appraiser and Single Family Director of Valuation at Freddie Mac.
All right. Now, we have a lot to get through today, but I think a good place to start for this conversation is when you're talking to lenders and you're having these conversations with other people in the industry, how prepared do they feel for UAD 3.6?
Michelle, you want to take that one first?
Sure, I can do that. We have been surveying our lender customers and asking them that very question, right? How ready are you? And there's a lot of people that are letting us know that they haven't even had those initial conversations. So I think we have some that are falling into not prepared at all. 55% of the people we surveyed said that they were actually starting to have conversations, but then that gives another 45 that haven't. So really, really surprised at that because this is an all important topic that is coming. It's here. So that was kind of surprising and getting that feedback that people are kind of waiting and seeing.
Yeah, and we are very similar feedback, Allison, really. And, we're a little step removed. Honestly, I would go to someone like Allison or many of our lender bank or sellers to kind of get a temperature on where they're at. And I think there's clear awareness, but I just think there's a bit of a sort of a latency on like where they're at exactly in the process in terms of getting ready.
So it seems like there's a little bit of a gap between awareness and readiness, which I think pretty nicely brings us to our next point, which is why UAD 3.6 matters right now. Why does this matter right now and isn't an eventually conversation?
Yeah, I think this is I'll go first. I think this is a great slide that's largely in the GSE space here. And the UAD 36 was a project really largely built around the need for and building a better data set and data standard. So it speaks to really needing better data earlier in the process. So a lot of times that starts with the appraisers. That's been kind of the main drive and focus around the redesign. I think that putting those pieces into place took many years. It's funny, we're recording this in January. I read recently that I think it was the Roman god Janus had sort of two heads, one looking back and one looking forward. And I think the month of January is actually sort of named in his honor. But the two faces do. They kind of look back to the past and they have one face looking forward. And I think that's a great kind of point to say, I believe that's really where we're at now. We can look back at all the hard work and all the effort that really the broader industry who participated in this has put in, and then begin to look forward about the important steps ahead. I would say, as a note, we're also very appreciative of the many industry partners and providers and appraisers who provided feedback and continued support for the initiative to help kind of deliver this data set, the data standard, all its benefits to the appraisal process.
Michelle, I want to bring you in to talk about timing from an operational standpoint. Why would you say this is a conversation for now and not later?
Right. I think if you wait until later, there could be like a bottleneck at the end when we're all pushing towards that November date, right? This is a good time to be testing this out. So interest rates are at a reasonable level right now, volumes at a reasonable level, where this is a good time to be testing that out. I've had a few conversations with some of our own customers about let's try to work a few test orders. Maybe we're not going to be going live with it, but let's take somebody that's done a current report in the old format and try it in the new to see the differences. So I think it's all important not to wait to the last minute. Otherwise, it could be like just this really bad bottleneck. What if interest rates go down? We have seasonal peaks and things like that. So right now is an excellent time to partner and at least test that out for yourself.
Michelle, would you say that there's a risk with waiting from an implementation timeline or even like a disruption or cost risk?
I think all of those things, right? It could end up like costing you and be very disruptive to, all of a sudden you're needing to switch and you don't have the time or the talent or the ability to do that. This is a lot of technical switching and things like that to where like maybe your tech support, might not have the bandwidth. Maybe your company may not have the bandwidth. So I think it's extremely risky to wait until, Q3. And with that customer survey that we did, there's a lot of them saying, well, I'm going to wait till the last quarter or up until that date in November. And I'm imploring them to start sooner. Like, well, let's talk about your rollout plan in June. Can I get those ones that wanted to start in June? Can I get you to talk about your rollout plan now? So I think they're going to end up running into just a mess, quite frankly, in operations and trying to get this through. And that feeds down to the customer. My goodness, we all want to make sure that we're supporting the customer through this and that it's a good experience for them. So that's my implorement. It's let's focus on the customer, make this a good experience for them.
Now, I want to, we talked a little bit about the why now piece, and we talked about why this is happening briefly, but I want to push things back over to Scott and talk about some of the key objectives that we're trying to obtain here. We talked a little bit about timeline piece, but I think it's really important to talk about what the GSEs are actually trying to achieve and what the key objectives are with UAD 3.6.
Yeah, that's a great question, Allison. I think you got a lot of the key kind of bullets there kind of highlighted. I think the first one is that data standard and that data consistency. I think that kind of runs as a through line across everything, particularly for us from a risk and risk management perspective. That transparency, so that again, that structure and that being able to all utilize the same usable structured data has tremendous impact. So from left to right there, reduce defects and variances, right? Variances. So where and that begins a lot of times with the appraiser, the boots on the ground, when they're collecting this data and, being able to do it in a structured format where somebody like Michelle, her company, big lenders, sellers can then, be able to have that clear line of sight. We ingest a lot of appraisals. So, we can't hire enough review appraisers to actually read every report manually. So we do utilize systems, and having that structured data really helps us to be able to get a line of sight across a big volume of work. And again, everything else there, the automation, the workflow, and I think that strong level of data really across the ecosystem is so important. To digress for a minute, we've heard a lot of chatter. I'm in front of a lot of industry stakeholders and particularly appraisers, and there's been a little sub conversation about kind of a myth about, well, there's a lot more data points. There are, but that's going to then translate for me, the appraiser, into much more work and this more comprehensive assignment. And I think if you kind of take a step back and look at maybe just a general learning curve, I think there will be more time for appraisers right out the gate in terms of getting an assignment and doing it to the new standard. But I will say that a lot of the data, the expanded data set, is we've really taken a lot of data that the appraisers would elaborate on in freeform text and narrative in general addenda into structured format, right? So in other words, appraisers do a great job telling the broader story, but with the legacy form, they're like trying to jam that story into an old format. And so the team looked at data points data they were trying to share: broadband internet, pools, outbuildings, adverse site conditions, required repairs, a variety of things that they were putting in the narrative that now we've pulled out and just made discrete data, think dropdown. So less writing, more clicking, learning curve. I think there'll be a lot of things from a practical perspective. I know that's not what the slide necessarily addresses, but I think it's an important point to say that was an objective, and we did give that a lot of thought.
So Scott, one thing I want to point to, and I'm going to say this more than once: reduces defects. Reduces defects, right? How many times have we've been looking at appraisals and we've been looking at situations from a lender lens, right? We don't want buybacks. We want to have good, clean reports. We want to have good information, and this is going to disseminate it so much better. It's going to reduce defects, reduce buybacks, reduce so much pain, because that is such a problem on the back end after the loans close, the customer's long on their way, but then that is a pain point of the lenders. So this is a more transparent process. It's a more, there's more information going out there. So I think that's very important for everybody to listen and get on board for the reduced defects.
Yeah, the 3Ds: the damage, defects, and deficiencies, and that's one to sort of elaborate on your example. That's one, Allison, right? Where an appraiser, again, we give them a big blank broad general addendum to provide all this commentary. Every appraiser does it a little bit differently, and they'll put in commentary about observed condition, work needed, repairs needed, damage that was observed. And sometimes that maybe doesn't get back into the body of the report to actually make an adjustment or be able to support an adjustment consideration in the development of value. That's an inconsistency. Somebody like a bank is going to read that and say, well, you said it's as is and it's fine, but in your addendum you go into a little bit of elaboration about all this work. So that it will eliminate, hopefully there'll be consistency, and it'll eliminate that back and forth many times on revision requests. I would say, coming with that, to our appraiser friends, I think with greater transparency comes greater accountability. So our appraiser friends are going to need to be really careful that they're telling that broad and fulsome story, and it's consistent from start to finish. And I think the data standard, as they're working through the new data set, is going to really be able to provide that structure.
I want to move into elaborating a little bit more on what the net impact is for the broader appraisal ecosystem, because I know that we've touched on a couple of things here about how things are going to be different for appraisers, but we've also mentioned a couple pieces specifically about what the overall goals are, and the aim to increase transparency and also reduce defects. And QC is something that I know lenders are always looking at. It might not be the most sexy talking point, but it's a really important one at the end of the day. So let's move into talking about the impact on the appraisal ecosystem, and not just appraisers, but also tying in that lender piece and the AMCs.
Right. So it's almost like everything the light touches, for this process is going to impact. So I think you've got to kind of bucket it in there. But with the things we've been talking about, like with the appraisers, right? Clearer guidance, clearer expectations. It's more structured for them. Like Scott was talking about, gets rid of those lengthy addendums, and that in turn, kind of helps out the quality control process, as you were mentioning, right? Some of the tools aren't ready, and I think it's good, for us right now, as we're kind of reviewing the appraisals, to get that muscle memory down, to know where to expect those things in the report, and not to think they're going to be found on some kind of lengthy addendum. So that's going to help streamline the process for the QC process for the lenders and for the AMCs, because there'll be an expectation of, like, these are the fields and these are the areas and where we should expect those. These are required fields. These are optional. So it's everybody's kind of impacted, but kind of has to work together. And QC is almost like the one piece that kind of like threads it all the way through, of making sure with each step along the way that the appraiser is doing a good quality report. The AMC, when they get that there, is receiving a good quality report and make sure that it meets the lender requirements, and then of course goes then on to the lender who provides it to the customer. So there's just a lot of things that we all have to coordinate together systematically. There's, there's a lot of things that we're going to have to do to kind of test that out prior to launching, which goes back to the critical part about let's start sooner versus later. But it's just one of these items where it's like it's not just impacting the appraisers. This then that has downstream impacts to every component impact in the appraisal process.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think another a big piece that impacts all the really the stakeholders across the ecosystem is it provides a foundation for whatever innovation and modernization may look like going forward. So I think again, it's just it was the legacy form had its day. It provided a great impact to the industry. It was important, but we're long overdue in terms of updating that. I think the great news for the industry is we're not introducing another static form. So with the static form came static certifications that you couldn't change, and it really limited a lot of at least awareness of a lot of advances, innovation, and particularly in technology that we could entertain. It's not saying it can still support the traditional process soup to nuts on a 1004 Form 70 equivalent, right, in a uniform format, but it can also, by not having a static set of certifications, allow other things to happen. And I think the broader stakeholder base, and I guess it starts really with the enterprises, can really provide that foundation for further modernization based on this data set.
I want to see, and both of you check me on this. To me, this reads as like an entire system change and not just a single handoff in any of the individual areas, which I understand can be a scary process, but it also seems very exciting. And it also seems like this is really the absolute foundation of future innovations and modernizations. Am I right there?
Yeah,
I
I
think
would agree. Yeah, I'm having more conversation these days with my lender partners and actually boots on the ground appraisers. We have had a few reports come through for 3.6, so those conversations right now are key. What are you seeing? What is happening? So I think those conversations need to be happening and need to be happening more often so that we can all kind of get on the same page. And then, it'll eventually, kind of like settle in. But right now, those conversations and discussing what we're seeing and being transparent is very important.
absolutely, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Allison. It is not just we're not changing one thing, and we're not changing one system, or rather one component. It is a system-wide change, and it's a big change in the way of thinking. So if you get an appraiser that kind of looks like me, right? You've been doing this a long time, and you've known one way to do it, and appraisers have gotten very proficient with the existing form and format. That this is a dramatic change. Firstly, gone are forms. The assignment used to start with going into your software, going across the suite of forms, selecting the form, pulling up and filling out the form. That's gone. You're not filling out a form anymore. You're interacting with data in a data set dynamically, and the format that resulting report will be in some structure. But that's a big change. So I think, and I enjoyed, kind of talking to Michelle prepping for this, that I think every point kind of looking in at this has got their own element of that sort of big realization of that system-wide change you talk about, right? So it's appraisers getting used to a whole new system. AMCs have a whole new way of developing everything, right, in terms of assessing all their impacts across technology, looking at everywhere, they may assessing their vendor readiness. So it's going to be a big deal. But anyway, long answer to your question, yes. System-wide change, not a single handoff like, oh, I'll get my software update and I'll be good. No, this is very, very different. So.
It's a commitment. It is an absolute commitment, but I think it's worthy.
Yeah.
Long overdue.
Now, Scott, in your last answer, you mentioned changes for appraisers and AMCs, but I want to talk a little bit more about changes for lenders and specifically the concerns that they have. So let's talk about concerns for actual implementation. Michelle, let's start with you and conversations that you've been having with lender partners.
Right. So going back to the survey that we did in the fourth quarter of last year, the two biggest points that came out from that, where they were concerned, our lender partners were concerned with appraiser adoption and then technology integration. Right, technology integration is like a really big component of that. You got to make sure the pipes are working and things, and the appraisals are flowing through. Appraiser adoption is starting for me to become less. With the reports that we put together for UAD 3.6 here, the appraisers that we're talking to are ready. They want to do this. Now, not all the software providers, not all the process providers are ready, but the ones that are ready, and they have been testing, the appraisers have been testing with that. They've been really good partners, very patient partners with us in trying to get the appraisals completed. So, obviously this is also a change in workflow that we've been talking about, and that lenders have to figure out. And that's where it's like they're relying on technology and, their IT teams and everything to kind of get that completed, in a reasonable amount of time. But, that's starting to come along as well. I know that right now, turn times will probably be longer than what we anticipated. So again, that word patience kind of comes along, right? People are asking, what's the turn time? What are the fees going to be? Those are the two things that have to develop over time as they get comfortable with the process. It's going to take us a while to establish those customary and reasonable fees for a process like this that is so new. So I just ask for patience as we kind of go through that. But, those are really the four big things that, that we've been hearing from our lender partners. And obviously at the end of the day, they want to have a compliant process. So, when they get through audits and things like that. So, everybody wants to be compliant. What does that look like in this new world? So it's a matter of patient keeping those avenues and those channels open to talk through, and then just time and patience.
Yeah, I would say some early returns are kind of in from the appraisers that have done many of the first few, and like you might expect, there's sort of mixed reaction. A couple of appraisers just variety of the deep action, right? I mean, they just sort of embraced it, did it, worked through it, acknowledged, yeah, it was, it took a little bit longer, but I've never done this before. And I think two different appraisers that might have done a couple of the first two or three, one used and leveraged some technology, one did everything by hand and just kind of transferred or typed information in and did it that way. And then you hear on the other end of the spectrum on social, somebody did their first one and they couldn't get to the keyboard quick enough to sort of bemoan how long it was and this is awful. And I'm like, well, I get that. I really do, in all sincerity, but also do your second one, do your fifth one, do your 10th one, we are reacting to that very first one, which is likely going to be very painful. The other thing in terms of adoption, I think from a lender perspective is, and I'm kind of a step away from that. So I get most of my information just from when we have our client and seller calls and we talk with some of the AMCs and appraisers that do the fulfillment is, I would say if you're in a lender shop, we've heard some best practices. One I heard that I loved was designate an executive sponsor and put one person on kind of driving this. The old joke about if you tell two people to feed the dog may likely not get fed because I thought you did it and you thought I did it and that type, so we don't want that little finger cross and pointing going on in terms of, gee, I thought somebody else was looking at. No, one person accountable. Think of everywhere the appraisal touches in your process. And that will allow you to assess the impacts to the technology and the people and the processes that Michelle talked about, and then ensure vendor readiness because everybody's got different platforms that they may use and have different integrations, and then test it end to end, right? Just make sure it kind of works. So there's all kind of tips that we can share. And from my perspective, I do it with a lot of respect to say banks are smart. They know what they're doing, but just to Michelle's point, there are ways we can avoid a third quarter 2026 collision where everybody's scrambling at the last minute. And then guess what? Then you're going to be in line probably with one of your vendors. And then it's just all that is going to stretch. So.
Yeah. Let me touch one more thing on the customer, Scott, that we're talking about here, where I think that the lenders need to focus on as well is, the experience of the property could be different, right? We have appraisers who, we have this experience as well, some showing up taking notes like they've always done to do their inspection. And then we've had some show up with, like their iPad and scanning and things like that. There could be a fundamental shift at what the appraisers are doing when they're out there to do the inspection. If some of them are doing their normal process, they might be at your house like about 30 minutes or an hour. But if they're doing it, taking on some of the new technology and actually completing some of the fields as they're going along with the appraisal, they could be at the house a little bit longer than inspected, because there could be a shift of like, where is the appraiser doing some of their work? Are they go ahead and validating the quality condition while they're there? Or are they using their notes when they go back to their office to validate that condition rating and that quality, and doing more of the work at home? So some of that stuff could then, shift out into the field where appraisers might be spending a little bit more time. So I think it's going to be key to ready your customer into what to expect when somebody comes out to the home, if they see them, scanning, with, using tools and technology, to kind of be prepared. I think it's always good to prepare your customer no matter what about the appraisal process, but this is a complete change. So from stem to stern, your customer needs to know what to expect.
I want to underline a point that both of you made in that appraisers are already running with this. And I think that's a really, really good point, because I feel like sometimes you don't give them all the credit that they're due. So just wanted to underline that for a second as we talk about lender adoption. But I also want to highlight that these concerns to me seem very valid, but they also seem like operational challenges and not structural problems. And this might not be the best analogy, but it sort of seems very similar to the new iPhone software update that just got dropped. There were a lot of people who hated it for the first couple days, and gradually you got used to it. You figured out where all the different things are. You figured out how to use the new interface. And there were a lot of very intentional changes that were made. So to me, this seems like a lot of very intentional changes that were made to improve the overall process that might feel and look a little bit different for different people at different points in time.
Yep.
Agreed.
I think it's a great analogy, man. And I was one that didn't like it the day it dropped. So, but yes, that I bit my tongue and took longer to find everything. And yeah, I think it's a good comparison.
So let's talk a little bit about what that actual day to day looks like. So, sort of
Mhm.
on the lender side, what this actually means for them. So, Michelle, walk us through the operational changes in day to day for lenders.
Right, and just a little bit of background. I've been, in some lending background, some large banks and stuff, but we've had to kind of set up processes based off of, new things that may have come along in the industry. So I know, like, one of the first things you want to do is getting those playbooks ready, right? Review your workflows, your process and everything, to make sure that you have those playbooks for all the users. Training as well is very important, but training alone isn't the only thing that's going to kind of get you going. You're going to have to actually kind of run through those tests and those different roles. But then what this ends up giving you, and this is one of my favorite phrases to say, and I love lean management, this gives you a sustainable, repeatable process, right? This gives you the ability to know that in the appraisal, everything's going to come through pretty much static with the required fields every time. You're not going to be hunting and pecking through an addendum trying to find the answers to the questions that you need. If you're looking for the highest and best use analysis, it's going to be right in that section. All those boxes are going to be checked with the information, not being, oh, not enough room because it's squeezed in there with the site section and I have to go rolling into an addendum. So it really gives you that sustainable process. And then with that cleaner report, it makes it easier to read, but then also to be able to implement those technology tools. Now, first off, and I've said this in a lot of the conversations with the lenders, because a lot of those technology tools aren't quite ready yet to read the UAD 3.6. Like, reviewing those yourselves, using the appendices that are on the Freddie Mac site to kind of help you review that, so that way you know what to expect. That way you can validate what your technology, your AI, your tools that you're going to use to review will be able to kind of help you. But it should be able to give you then a process you can automate and do tiered reviews, do like a waterfall in how you kind of create that review process. So it should then also then for you create less revisions. So that's really important in timing, right? In order to get the information from the valuation over to your lending division so that they can, proceed with the loan. Cutting down a matter of days, is important to that customer experience. So I think that, once you kind of get settled into the process, I think you're going to find out that it's quicker, it's cleaner, it's sustainable, it's repeatable, all those wonderful lean management words that we all love. And I think that, once we get past the learning curve, I think that there's going to be, a lot less friction with this process.
So I've known Michelle a long time, and it's evident we both have been Six Sigmatized at some point in our past with Lean and Six Sigma principles, and I couldn't agree more with the sustainable, repeatable, transparent process. And I would say all the points she made, Allison. I think the other side of that is the appraiser lens looking at the very same points too, right? Nobody benefits more than lower revision and retouch rates than appraisers. It's one of the many things I hear from, gee, there wasn't a comment about this and you didn't touch it. Yeah, I did. It was buried in page fill in the blank on the addendum and they couldn't find it. To, candidly, appraisers get very good at building efficiencies into the process, but we want to be real cautious they're not building efficiencies and cutting actual appraisal development out of the process. There's ways you can gain efficiencies, and I think over time, I'm convinced this data set will. But again, I said earlier, at the risk of repeating myself, I think with greater transparency is going to come greater accountability for the appraiser. They're going to need to be able, that report is going to need to withstand the light of day, and there's going to need to be a consistent through line with not sending the reader on a little hide and seek for information. And what you said at the back of the report should be the same at the beginning of the report. And a lot of the structure of the data, there's going to be a whole discrete section as an example for the any damage, repairs, defects to the property that's readable right out the gate. You can see what it is, see that the appraiser considered it. The appraiser can share whether it has a measurable impact, or whether there's a value consideration that they were able to provide an adjustment for. So anyway, I amen to everything. I think day-to-day for the lender also translates pretty clearly over on the other side to day-to-day for the appraiser as well.
Yeah, agreed.
So let's talk about what an operational win looks like with UAD 3.6. What does success really look like, and what operational choices make a difference?
Yeah, I think the very win will be successful implementation, right? I mean, all that standardization that comes with the flexibility that the structure provides, I think is the biggest win, right? Getting again, appraisers on the front end accustomed to that, that dynamic interaction with the data, to that standard set, then carrying forward to and through, if an appraisal management or a company or someone else is used to facilitate and fulfill that order, to their processes of review, to the lender, and then eventually to Freddie or Fannie. So that standard view, I think, is going to be one of the biggest wins. Michelle?
Yeah. I mean, for me, just going back to what we talked about, reducing defects, right? So we have a standard process, a standard data set, a standard expectation. It's very clear of what the appraiser is supposed to be doing, and that then trickles down. But that just it's like the last bullet point, strengthens investor confidence through consistency, right? And that's one of the things that we focus on, is we want to make sure we have good reports, clean, supportable reports, and that will help kind of reduce the defects. But I think this is going to be a game changer for us.
So we just defined really what success looks like and what the operational win is here, with actual implementation. Let's go back to the early adoption piece and talk about why early adoption matters.
I'm glad we're circling. Yeah, I'm glad we're kind of circling back to this, right? It's like, hey, we said a lot of words. We started out with, hey, let's become early adopters. We said a lot of words to try to convince you. It's like, here's where we're driving home our selling point here with early adopters, right? Before the volume spikes, let's work together to test and refine the process. I think we can avoid a lot of last minute, mishaps if we can, get in there and kind of test this out and, before interest rates drop, before we have those seasonal changes. So I think it's absolutely, time to start working on, like it's showing here, mapping out those workflows and training your staff and just kind of getting ready for this to kick off. Don't wait. Start now.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. We talked a little bit. We talk from time to time too, and there's no really good like carrot or incentive other than just having the discipline to do it. It really is. We joked on an earlier call. The first week of April is a bad time to start thinking about putting your taxes together, right? Because that deadline's looming. You're going to be in a scramble.
Yeah.
If you use some accountant or some support, everybody's going to be buried down the line. That's a bad move. And I'm guilty of it as the next person of certain things that seem far out in the future. Mandatory is not till November. My goodness, I'm old enough. We will blink and it will be October. So that time will pass. And to Michelle's point, just, there are so many benefits that we can't talk about it enough. If there are hiccups, there's a whole reason. Well, I just thought of this, right? It's the whole reason the GSEs had limited production before we had broad production is to test everything and to learn what we can learn and get one file in and then two and then five and then 10 and just, be able to make sure the workflow worked the way we wanted it. We were able to do, gives you time to do sufficient training. I think training the staff here on this sheet is huge. You're going to have people that like appraisers and like everybody else in the ecosystem has been used to doing it one way. That one way is gone. It's not just being modified or tweaked, it's gone. So we echo we sing off the same choir sheet here a lot. I would just think there's a lot of good reasons to really early adopt and put that plan in. And I 100% get it. It's not a flaming issue right now. It's like a lot of the innovation and the alternatives that both enterprises have. They're really, really good when times are busy, appraiser capacity is stretched, and you've got lower risk loans that would qualify. But if you haven't really invested the time and the money and effort to get that workflow set up, the minute the wave hits is not the right time. So anyway, I think we've kind of hit the point pretty heavily here, but I think early adoption is really, really key.
I also love that both of you gave like really great logistical operational standpoints. This would be like to me like a stressful, very bad adoption experience doing it last minute. Like it would be grudging. So I would personally be on the like, let's get this done a little bit early. Let's all feel good about it. Let's not be really stressed in our execution because there's nothing worse than like facing a deadline and being like slowly seeing that time tick away and then being like, oh, it's October.
Yeah, guess what next month is? It's mandatory UAD. And I'll just make a quick plug, and if you were going to get to it, I apologize. The both enterprises have put out the joint UAD team has put out a lot of great resources, candidly almost more than you can handle. But go to Freddie Mac UAD readiness, and you will or go to the UAD site for Freddie Mac. All kinds of resources there. One that sticks out, and I think it pertains to this conversation, is a lender readiness kit that the joint thinking about in terms of, Michelle can do this with her left hand, but, we talk about mapping all the workflows, assessing the impact of technology, all the steps to ensure vendor readiness and some of the things we've talked about, but, encouraging our lender or sellers to, use that as a guide, use anything there as a guide, but that's one in particular that if you need something in black and white, there it is. And you can hand that off to that executive sponsor or who's ever going to be on point for this to say, hey, are we okay? And what do we need to do now to ensure that we're going to be ready and we can test properly?
And I'll give a shout out to that 17 training modules that you created. That was the best training I think you all have ever put together. It goes step by step through each section of the appraisal, and it's not appraiser speak, right? It seems to be lender directed and very easily digest and understand. So absolutely love that training that you all put together.
Good deal.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what building internal readiness looks like. What should lenders focus on internally to prepare? Michelle, I think this is a you question.
Here we go. Yeah, definitely mapping out those workflows, right? Because it could be changing. I mean, you could be looking at like a tiered review system here and then identifying, systems and everything in which it flows into. So it's basically, doing really good product mapping at this time to make sure that you've got kind of everything covered. Let's talk about your lean management, identifying your RACI, who's responsible, accountable, consulted and identified, right? Or informed, excuse me. But, you have to keep kind of like moving through the process of, updating your documents and your guides and keeping everybody informed. Those playbooks are so important. And then, of course, we were talking about training, and, there's some great, appraisal sources out there for training and some great companies. But then on the GSE website, as Scott was discussing, on Freddie, they've got some really good documentation, some appendices, some sample appraisals. So, making sure that everybody understands the new elements. There's an outline called Appendix F1 that'll take you through, each section of the report and the expected answer, what's required, what's not. So I have C1, appendices C1 and F1 open on my desk all the time now as we go through reviewing the appraisals. So, it's just a matter of kind of walking through, establishing your process, getting that project manager established and walking through and make sure that they've got everybody identified, through who's responsible and who's going to be accountable for these things, and kind of walk that through. So a lot of things that need to be taken care of, just, not just within like a valuation department, if you happen to have that somebody reviewing, but the entire enterprise, to make sure that this gets, the process gets through and tested. And then, of course, your final end user, your customer.
Now, I think a natural segue here is to also recognize that there's a whole piece of this that is also the technology integration and partner piece. So after we look at that internal readiness, what should lender or how should even lenders think about the technology and partners portion of this transition?
Right. I think this is a good time to look through some kind of a waterfall process based off of your risk, right? You can set those things up to look at, do you actually need a full appraisal to be completed for this particular assignment? What is your risk? What is the purpose? What is the lending for this one, and kind of establish those workflows, because it could be something you could be doing a hybrid process with. They have the property data collection reports that have been a tremendous lift in time and in money to the customer that have been kind of implemented. So, this is, again, an opportunity to kind of relook at, how your workflows are going when it comes to, the need for products. And then, of course, you want to look at those tools and technology that you may need to help partner with, with other companies and stuff, to see how can I make my processes such where I can cut down on those errors? How can I, have some automation on top of this where I can, have it, QC stuff for me, or have it then work with that waterfall to see, okay, what's the proper route for this report to be reviewed. And again, in all this and establishing this is going to help you be compliant, because when you have that automation, there's less, human error to say, oh, the handoff or the pass should be here. It helps you then kind of in your compliance department of making sure that, based off of this risk score or, what have you, set in your policies and procedures, that you're compliant and following the right process. So it's really important to, partner and look into the tools and technology and try to decide what your workflow should now look like for valuations as a whole. So definitely helps you get, just operational readiness is really important, and to collaborate, with a strong company.
Now, I also want to recognize that this is the current big hurdle, but there's also a piece that you both talked about how this is the foundation moving forward. So let's zoom out for a second and talk about how UAD 3.6 really sets the stage for the long term and the future.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that first. I think it's a great question because I think it is very forward looking to the earlier reference. I think that this data standard and data set does set that foundation to the comment that it is foundational and not final. And I think it can more continually keep pace with valuation, not only just valuation, innovation, and modernization, but also give us at the enterprises a greater line of sight into what may be driving value, right? So the more, again, through the earlier example, that there's a lot of unstructured data in free form text that I think appraisers are telling a very meaningful story that we don't really have a line of sight on in terms of seeing that in any structured format. As we begin to get to see that, whether it's we talked about pools and outbuildings and broadband internet and maybe waterfront details, energy efficient packages, we'll get a whole line of sight into what might be driving value, number one. And two, over time, put a risk lens on that, we may see where we have maybe opportunity to get a little more aggressive with rep and warranty relief or other aspects that would really benefit lenders. Like hey, homes with fill in the blank have very, very, very low delinquency and buybacks. Well, that may fit into a broader risk conversation to really to their benefit. So again, right now, that's a big part of the story that we don't know. So I think to your point, Allison, great question. I think there's a lot of future of valuation that kind of hinges on this, and it lays the foundation. And again, as things change, and one of the things early in the conversation 7-8 years ago was broadband internet. Oh, that's a big thing. We need to capture that in communities where we don't have it, and that's true. But I'm just picking on this. I don't have any background information other than to say maybe Starlink, or maybe it'll be some brand new thing that'll make broadband sort of like old, we might laugh about it now. Like, oh, remember when we thought that was important? Well, then we can change to whatever the latest thing is. We'll add that as an enumeration, and then appraisers can start capturing it and saying, look, people are really up, they're really paying additional money, and it really adds value to property. So anyway, that then will be just a change to the data standard. Nothing else changes. You put in a change order, you implement it, and then you continue to move forward.
Yeah, I think it's kind of TBD with as much data that's going to be collected now, because like you were alluding to, the accessory dwelling units and other things, they were just pretty much like a line on the adjustment grid, or just like a little blurb in there. Now we're going to be getting the size, the condition, the photos of the interior, a lot of information about some of these additional features, which were quite frankly at times causing some of those overvaluation flags, right? And not having that being kind of captured and kind of baked into the models, it's like, well, now we're going to have that information. It's like, how is that going to then refine it so that we don't see that? So then values are kind of better dialed in, and we're not getting as much questioning back to us, or like those really high scores of this is an overvaluation. There's a problem here. When it's like, well, when I look at it, I don't see there's a problem. It just has a bunch of little extra outbuildings and a pool and some other things. So I think this is going to just keep refining, and more to come as we get to digest a lot of this information. So, but see, the future is very bright. I see it as being more automated. I see appraisers as being used and implemented carrying forward in order to interpret what these tools and what this information is saying, because I think there is a little bit of a fear from appraisers that they're going to be replaced. To the contrary, that is not what is going to be happening. It's like we need the appraisers to interpret the results in which we are seeing, and to provide that information. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, in case there's somebody listening is like, oh, they're trying to replace us. It's like, no, actually, in the future, we still need you. Vital.
Kind of need you more than ever. Yeah, and that's part of the broader discussion. We've kind of pivoted on the fact that appraisers within an assignment identify the highest and best use of a property, and we've kind of captured that phrase and said, turn that into the appraiser as they look at an assignment. Where is their highest and best use? And you can take that across every step. It's not saying they can't do certain things. They do all the steps very well, from collecting data on, but is that where your highest and best use is. And to Michelle's point, I think it's in that analysis. It's interacting with all this data. It's helping us understand what's going on in markets that are also dynamic. So the data is just going to structure the story. The appraisers are the ones that are going to need to analyze and translate that story for us. So very important.
I want to move over to final thoughts and share some resources. To me, this has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. It seems like this is really an opportunity, and that's how the industry should be thinking about this. And it really, UAD 3.6 looks like an upgrade to the entire life cycle. But I will let y'all chime in with your final thoughts and any additional resources that you'd like to share.
Go ahead, Scott.
Okay, I think you've hit a lot of the key ones there, Allison, and we've talked about many, right? Just the drive for early adoption, I do believe is critical. I think I think there likely is a competitive advantage sooner than later. The one thing none of us know, and certainly I'm at the front of that line, is once we start to get kind of a core amount of 3.6 appraisals coming in, and appraisers have already done the hard cut from the legacy 2.6 over to 3.6. How many, and it's a question, I don't know, how many are going to want to dance in both platforms? Or is it going to be, look, I've already got new 3.6 software, I'm getting proficient here, I'm kind of getting a run under me, that's all I want to do. And then, so it's a classic kind of chicken and egg. Where does it start? I mean, so lenders need to be ready, I would think, at some level, and however they fulfill those internally or externally, all the systems need to kind of be ready to go. So I guess in a long way, it winds all the way back to competitive advantage to say, if you're ready to go and the world's changing to 3.6 and you're ready, then you're ready.
Yeah.
Even though we will accept 2.6 up till first of November, that might not be a great strategy.
Yeah, that just goes back to the early adoption is critical, right? One of the bullet points on here for sure. And I don't want anybody to think they're on an island. Scott and I are very approachable. Just please reach out if you have questions. We're here to support. And really, I think in just talking to like our other industry partners, everybody's very approachable, and really we're all really moving the same direction, wanting to get this done. But it is important that you take those initial steps and get going on the process so that you can find out where your pitfalls may be internally, right? But again, we are absolutely here to support you in anything that you may need through this process.
Yeah, and I'll just add quickly on this slide. Firstly, thanks to our friends at Housing Wire. You guys are really, provide a lot of leadership here too, and I know this is an important issue, so we appreciate the platform. Michelle and I work together a lot as we do we partner across the industry. And approachable 100%, and a couple of the inset resources there. I would really, encourage folks, appraisers, lenders, vendors, whomever across the ecosystem, utilize the GSE resources that are out there, and really ensure that you're kind of up to date, ready, and help you formulate your questions, if nothing else, that you're going to have internally, and then you can really move forward from there.
To anyone who's listening and maybe isn't on the page, we're going to have all of these linked on the landing page that this video is going to be hosted on. So you will have the resources for the Accurate Group UAD 3.6 readiness page and the Freddie Mac UAD 3.6 resource page, as well as a couple of the other things that Scott and Michelle pointed out throughout this conversation. But I want to thank you both so much for joining me today. I appreciate you both spending an hour at this point going over UAD 3.6. Before we started recording this, I mentioned that the current top trending article on Housing Wire right now is about UAD 3.6. It really is the topic of the day. It's something that there are a lot of questions about, and there are so many resources that are out there on getting you prepared for it. And with that, Michelle, Scott, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Allison.
Thank you,
Door's
Allison.
always open. So but thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you.